All right, so let's jump right into it with a topic that has the entire football world kind of on edge. Saudi Arabia and they're practically guaranteed hosting of the 2034 World Cup.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got the FIFA announcement coming up soon, but
Yeah.
realistically, it seems like a done deal at this point. But here's the thing, everyone's talking about the shiny new stadiums and these crazy mega projects, but there's this whole other side to this story that no one wants to talk about. And frankly, it's pretty disturbing. We're talking about potential human rights violations, worker exploitation, and even deaths connected to all this construction. It's a lot to unpack.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. We can't just gloss over all the red flags, all these investigations and reports that are painting a very different picture than the one Saudi Arabia is trying to sell. It's like this clash between their grand vision, 11 brand new stadiums, 185,000 hotel rooms, and then you've got these horrific accounts of worker exploitation from human rights organizations and journalists. Can we really celebrate the world's biggest sporting event if it might be built on human suffering?
That's a heavy question for sure. Okay, so let's break this down a bit.
Right.
On the one hand, we've got Saudi Arabia, and they're pushing this image of unprecedented progress. We mentioned the stadiums, the hotels, and then there's this futuristic city they're building called Neom. It's straight out of a sci-fi movie. But then on the other hand, you've got this ITV documentary called Kingdom Uncovered, and they dropped this pretty shocking statistic. Apparently, there have been over 21,000 migrant worker deaths in Saudi Arabia just since 2016, many of them unexplained. And all of this is happening under their Vision 2030 program, which is supposed to be about modernizing and diversifying their economy. It just makes you think about everything that went down with Qatar's World Cup and how history might be repeating itself.
Yeah, the parallels are definitely there, and it's super concerning to say the least. It's not just about the number of deaths either, but also this lack of transparency and accountability that's a common thread. The kafala system, which they claim to have reformed, still puts migrant workers in an incredibly vulnerable position.
Right, it's basically this sponsorship system where workers are tied to their employers, and they have very little power to speak out against abuse or seek help.
Exactly. It creates this power imbalance that makes them targets for exploitation. You've got wage theft, forced labor, unsafe working conditions. It's all been documented by organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch for years now.
And yet the situation doesn't seem to be getting any better.
The lack of independent oversight in Saudi Arabia makes it incredibly difficult to know what's truly going on. Without proper investigations and access to information, it's impossible to hold anyone accountable for these abuses.
It feels like they're operating under a veil of secrecy, which makes the whole thing even more suspicious. And then you have FIFA, an organization that claims to be all about human rights. Their policy documents talk about tackling global challenges. And Infantino himself has said that they're committed to upholding the dignity and rights of everyone involved in their events. But it's hard to reconcile those words with their actions.
Right. There's a massive disconnect between what they say and what they do, like the bidding process for the 2034 World Cup. It's been widely criticized as lacking transparency and fairness. Many people believe that the outcome was basically predetermined in favor of Saudi Arabia from the get-go. And then the human rights requirements for the 2034 bid. They seem to have been significantly watered down compared to the requirements for the 2026 bid. It just makes you question how committed they really are to upholding human rights standards.
Yeah, and the fact that they accepted a firm link to Saudi Arabia to conduct a human rights assessment of their bid doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
Oh, it's a huge conflict of interest.
Yeah.
It throws the entire assessment process into question. Some legal experts are even saying that. FIFA's negligence in addressing these issues could be seen as corporate manslaughter.
Whoa, that's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and it highlights the potential legal ramifications of their inaction.
So, are you saying that FIFA could be held responsible for worker deaths because they failed to address the risks to worker safety and well-being?
It's definitely a possibility that needs to be explored. It brings into focus FIFA's responsibility to protect the rights and lives of everyone involved in their events, especially those who are most vulnerable, like migrant workers.
It's just crazy to think that people celebrating on the pitch could be standing on a foundation of human suffering. And, while we're on the topic of FIFA's questionable handling of worker well-being, let's talk about the whole compensation situation following the Qatar World Cup.
Yeah, their own subcommittee investigated the impact of the tournament on workers and concluded that FIFA had a responsibility to provide financial remedy to those who suffered harm. During the construction and preparation phases, they even recommended using the Qatar Legacy Fund, which was a $50 million fund set up to address the tournament's legacy issues. to compensate these workers.
But instead of doing that,
Yeah.
they decided to use the fund for international development projects.
It was a huge slap in the face to the workers who made the Qatar World Cup possible.
Yeah, instead of prioritizing the well-being of those directly affected by the tournament's darker side, they chose to focus on their global image.
It's all about optics, not ethics.
Which makes you wonder, is this all just one giant sports washing scheme? Is Saudi Arabia using the World Cup to distract from their human rights record? Because it seems like they're pulling out all the stops to project this positive image to the world.
Play the Game did some research on this, and they found that Saudi Arabia has secured over 900 sponsorship deals across various sports. 194 of those deals are specifically focused on football.
Wow, so they're not messing around. And they're not just targeting individual teams or leagues either. They're going straight to the top with deals like their $100 million annual partnership with FIFA through Saudi Aramco, which is their state-owned oil company.
Yeah, that deal raised a lot of eyebrows. People were concerned about FIFA partnering with an entity linked to human rights abuses and environmental damage.
And remember, that open letter signed by over 100 women's footballers. They urged FIFA to reconsider the deals, citing humanitarian and environmental concerns. But it seems like their pleas fell on deaf ears.
It's like financial interests are always trumping ethical considerations.
And it's not just FIFA that's turning a blind eye.
The relative silence from the international community is deafening. Despite all the evidence, all the concerns raised by human rights groups, many national football associations and global organizations are hesitant to take a strong stance against Saudi Arabia's bid.
It's like the allure of the World Cup is blinding everyone to the very real human cost.
And that's a dangerous precedent to set.
Absolutely. We'll dive deeper into the implications of all this in a bit. But first, let's take a quick break.
Sounds good. It's kind of scary how we're getting used to these issues, you know, like it's just part of the game now. But that's not right. We need to stop and think, what does that say about us? As football fans, as human beings, are we really okay with turning a blind eye to abuse just for some entertainment?
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow, but we got to face it head on. If we don't hold these powerful people accountable, we become part of the problem.
Exactly, and it's not just about Saudi Arabia. This whole sports washing thing is happening all over the world. Countries with terrible human rights records are using these big events to clean up their image and distract from what's really going on.
And it's working. But those mega events come at a huge cost, especially for the people who are already the most vulnerable. The workers, the communities, the activists who dare to speak out.
Right, let's go back to those migrant workers in Saudi Arabia for a second. They're the ones facing the real consequences of all this. That kafala system we talked about, it basically traps them in a cycle of abuse and exploitation.
Wage theft, forced labor, unsafe working conditions. We're even hearing about deaths that are never properly investigated. And with all the workers they'll need for the 2034 World Cup, things are only going to get worse.
The ITUC Africa, which represents millions of workers across the continent, filed a formal complaint with the UN about this.
Oh, wow. What did they say?
They basically called out this relentless cycle of abuse and exploitation. They're really worried that the World Cup is just going to make things worse, especially since those reforms to the kafala system haven't really changed anything.
Their voice carries a lot of weight because, let's be real, a lot of those construction workers are probably going to come from Africa. And it's not just them. Human Rights Watch has been saying the same thing. Those reforms to the kafala system, just for show, they haven't addressed the root of the problem.
It's all designed to keep workers powerless and dependent, so they can't fight back.
It's a messed up system, and FIFA's just sitting there pretending nothing is wrong.
They talk a big game about human rights, but their actions tell a different story. By giving the World Cup to a country with such a terrible labor system, they're basically saying that profits are more important than people.
So we got to ask ourselves, can we really enjoy these tournaments knowing what's going on behind the scenes?
It's a question we all need to think about.
Okay, so what can we do? How do we change this system and make sure future World Cups aren't built on exploitation?
It's not going to be easy. We need more transparency, independent oversight, and real accountability.
That all sounds good, but how do we actually make that happen? Especially in a place like Saudi Arabia, where they don't seem too interested in changing things.
The international community needs to step up and put pressure on them.
So are you saying we can't just sit back and watch?
Right. We got to use our voices and our power to demand change.
But what can regular people actually do?
There are things we can do. Support organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They're doing amazing work on the ground. Stay informed about the issues. Talk to people, challenge those who try to downplay the problem.
So education is key. But what about taking action? How do we hold FIFA and these other powerful organizations accountable?
Consumers have a lot of power, actually. We can choose to support companies that align with our values and boycott those that are complicit in these abuses or that just don't care.
Yeah, hit them where it hurts their wallets. But we got to do it together. We can't support a system that puts profits over people.
Exactly. We need to make it clear that we won't stand for sporting events built on exploitation.
It's a powerful message. But how do we get people to listen? There's so much noise around these mega events. It's easy to forget about the human cost.
Athletes have a huge platform and a lot of influence. If they start speaking out against these injustices, it could make a real difference.
But it's risky for them to speak out, though.
It is. But there are some brave athletes out there who are willing to stand up for what's right, and they can inspire others to do the same.
We need more people like that. People who are willing to fight for what's right, even when it's hard.
It's a fight worth having. The future of sports depends on it. We gotta challenge injustice, hold those in power accountable, and make sure these events celebrate human achievement, not exploitation and suffering.
It's like we're at this turning point, you know?
Yeah.
Not just for football, but for all of global sports. Are we going to keep going down this road where money and spectacle are all that matter? Or are we going to finally demand something better, something that actually represents what sports are supposed to be about?
It's not just about talking anymore. It's time to act. We need to move beyond just acknowledging the problem and start finding real solutions. How can we use the power of these huge events like the World Cup to make things better, instead of just making them worse?
It's a tough question, but I think the first step is realizing that this isn't just FIFA's responsibility. It's on all of us, governments, corporations, athletes, fans. We all have a part to play.
One idea I've heard is to have way stricter human rights rules for countries that want to host these events. Like, imagine if they had to prove they were serious about labor rights and freedom of speech before they could even be considered as a host.
That would definitely change things. It wouldn't just be a box to tick anymore.
Exactly. It would send a clear message that human rights are non-negotiable.
And it would force these countries to make real changes, not just pretend for a few weeks.
And let's not forget about the power of consumers. Sponsors are the ones paying for all this, and they care about what people think. If fans start demanding that sponsors hold these host countries accountable, things could really start to shift.
Right. It's about hitting them where it hurts. Imagine if Nike or Coca-Cola said, "We're only supporting events in countries that respect human rights."
That would be huge.
It would force everyone to reevaluate their priorities.
And it's not just about the big companies. Individual choices matter too. Every time you buy something, you're supporting a company. Make sure those companies reflect your values.
It's about voting with your wallet and amplifying the voices of the people who are being silenced, the workers, the activists, the communities who are suffering.
Social media is a powerful tool for that. We can use it to expose the truth and connect with other people who want to make a difference.
It's about changing the story. We can't just focus on the glitz and glamour. We have to talk about the human cost.
We need to demand more from our own governments and football associations too. They need to be held accountable for their decisions. Are they putting human rights first, or are they just chasing money and power?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, like one person can't make a difference.
But that's not true. Every action, every choice matters. When we come together, we have incredible power.
The 2034 World Cup is still a few years away, but the choices we make today will determine what that event will be. Will it be a celebration of progress and unity? Or will it be another stain on our collective conscience?
It's up to us. We can't wait for someone else to fix this. The world is watching. What kind of legacy do we want to leave?
So let's make the right choice. Let's fight for what's right. Let's build a future where sports are truly a force for good. This has been a deep dive into some pretty heavy stuff, but hopefully it's inspired you to learn more, to get involved, and to make a difference, because together we can create a world where everyone's rights are respected, and where sports are a celebration of our shared humanity.